We live in a strange time. Extraordinary events keep happening that undermine the stability of our world. Suicide bombings, waves of refugees, Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, the mainstream media, social justice, critical race theory, COVID-19, even Brexit. Yet those in control seem unable to deal with it. No one has any vision of a different or a better kind of future. This is a story about how over the past 40 years, politicians, finances and technological utopians, rather than face up to the real complexities of the world, retreated. Instead, they constructed a simpler version of the world in order to hang on to power. And as this fake world grew, all of us went along with it, because the simplicity was reassuring. Even those who thought they were attacking the system, the radicals, the artists, the musicians, and our whole counterculture, actually became part of the trickery, because they too had retreated into the make-believe world, which is why their opposition has no effect and nothing ever changes. But this retreat into a dream world allowed dark and destructive forces to fester and grow outside. Forces that are now returning to pierce the fragile surface of our carefully constructed fake world. Two young hackers in New York thought that Barlow was describing a fantasy world, that his vision bore no relationship at all to what was really emerging online. They called themselves Fiber Optic and Acid Freak. And they spent the time exploring and breaking into giant computer networks that they knew were the hard realities of modern digital power.
My specific instance, I was charged with conspiracy to commit a few dozen overt acts, they called them, among a number of things having to do with computer trespass and I guess computer eavesdropping, interception, unauthorized access to federal interest computers, which is pretty vague law, communications network computers and so on.
In a notorious public debate online, the two hackers attacked Barlow. What infuriated the most was Barlow's insistence that there was no hierarchy or controlling powers in the new cyber world. The hackers set out to demonstrate that he was wrong. Acid Freak hacked into the computers of a giant corporation, TRW. TRW had originally built the systems that ran the Cold War and the US military. They had helped create the delicate balance of terror. Now, TRW had adapted their computers to run a new system, that of credit and debt. Their computers gathered up the credit data of millions of Americans, and were being used by the banks to decide individuals' credit rating. The hackers broke into the TRW network, stole Barlow's credit history and published it online. The hackers were demonstrating the growing power of finance, how the companies that ran the new systems of credit knew more and more about you, and increasingly used that information to control your destiny. The system that was allowing this to happen were a new, giant network of information connected through computer service. Hackers were questioning whether Barlow's utopian rhetoric about cyberspace were really a convenient camouflage, hiding the emergence of a new and growing power that was way beyond politics. But cyberspace was not the only imaginary story being created. Faced with a humiliating defeat in the Lebanon, President Reagan's government was desperate to shore up the vision of a moral world, where good America struggled against evil. And to do this, they were going to create a simple villain. An imaginary enemy. One that would free them from the paralyzing complexity of real Middle Eastern politics. And the perfect candidate was a Libyan colonel, Muammar Gaddafi, the ruler of Libya. The Americans were going to ruthlessly use Colonel Gaddafi to create a fake terrorist mastermind. And Gaddafi was going to happily play along, because it would turn him into a famous world figure. Colonel Gaddafi would take power in a coup in the 1970s. But from the very start, he was convinced he was more than just a leader of one country. He believed that he was an international revolutionary, whose destiny was to challenge the power of the West. When he was a young officer, Gaddafi had been sent to England for training. And he had detested the patronizing racism that he said he had found within British society.
Yes, I attended a course. I have been in England since 1966, from April to August.
You had the best month.
I was in Beaconsfield, a village called Beaconsfield, in Army School. In fact, we ill-treated in that place from some British officers. I think those officers were Jews, maybe Jews.
But ill-treated in what sort of way?
In many ways. They ill-treat us every time.
By being rude or by being bullying or?
In their own behavior towards us, they ill-treat us. They hate us anyhow because of colonization. It is a result of colonialism.
Once in power, Gaddafi had developed his own revolutionary theory, which he called the Third Universal Theory. It was an alternative, he said, to communism and capitalism. He published it in a green book, but practically no one read it. He had sent money and weapons to the IRA in Ireland to help them overthrow the British ruling class. But all the other Arab leaders rejected him and his ideas. They thought that he was mad, and by the mid-1980s, Gaddafi was an isolated figure with no friends or no global impact. Then suddenly, that changed. In December 1985, terrorists attacked Rome and Vienna simultaneously, killing 19 people, including 5 Americans. There was great pressure on President Reagan to retaliate.
Get off of your stick, Mr. President. The American people are sick and tired of being kicked around. You talk, Puck. Let's see you use some of these billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons that you've asked us to approve. Your words are cheap talk.
President Reagan immediately announced that Gaddafi was definitely behind the attacks.
These murderers could not carry out their crimes without the sanctuary and support provided by regimes such as Colonel Gaddafi's in Libya. The Rome and Vienna murders are only the latest in a series of brutal terrorist acts committed with Gaddafi's backing.
But the European security services who investigated the attacks were convinced that Libya was not involved at all, that the mastermind behind the attacks was in fact Syria, and that the terrorists were being directed by the Syrian intelligence agencies.
But the Americans say that the attack at Rome airport was organized by Gaddafi, not by Damascus.
No.
What do you say?
We don't have any evidence.
You have no evidence?
Supporting such affirmation. The only evidence we have shows a Syrian connection.
You say that it was Libya, and the president said the evidence of Libya's culpability was irrefutable.
Yeah.
But the Italian authorities to whom I've spoken say emphatically on the record that their investigations have shown that it was entirely masterminded by Syria.
I don't agree with that at all.
Well, they've interrogated the surviving terrorists.
I must just say I don't agree with that.
But you've no evidence that Libya was in on the planning either.
Our evidence on Libya is circumstantial but very strong.
But why does the president then say it's irrefutable if you call it circumstantial?
Well, people can be convicted and sentenced in our courts on circumstantial evidence.
But what made it even more confusing was that, although there seemed to be no evidence that Gaddafi had been behind the attacks, he made no attempt to deny the allegation. Instead, he went the other way and turned the crisis into a global drama, threatening suicide attacks against America.
This hostile position cannot be explained in racist and crusade terms. Suicidal attacks will have to be an answer to a military attack. But Libya is not affected by such measures that Reagan has declared. Stinking, rotten crusader.
Gaddafi now started to play a role that was going to become very familiar. He grabbed the publicity that had been given to him by the Americans and used it dramatically. He promoted himself as an international revolutionary who would help to liberate oppressed peoples around the world, even the blacks in America. Gaddafi arranged for a live satellite link to a mass meeting of the Nation of Islam in Chicago.
Sisters, it is with great honor and privilege that I present to you the leader of the Al-Fatah revolution from Libya, our brother Muammar al-Gaddafi.
Gaddafi told them that Libya was now their ally in their struggle against white America.
It's my full support and support of my country to your struggle for freedom, for emancipation.
Gaddafi promised that he would supply weapons to create a black army in America of 400,000 men. If white America refuses to accept blacks as US citizens, it must therefore be destroyed. Gaddafi also invited a group of German rocket scientists to come to Libya to build him a rocket. He insisted it had no military purpose. Libya was now going to explore outer space.
I think it is peaceful and civilian activity for investigation of space and something like this. And it has nothing to do with any military things.
But no one believed him. Journalists warned that Gaddafi was really preparing to attack Europe, vividly dramatizing the new danger.
That is something like this, which goes that way to put something into space. But the same device, tilted, say, to an angle of 45 degrees, could, of course, become something very different. A missile possibly carrying a warhead. That would put Libya within range of an enormous area. A chilling proposition with its range of 2,000 kilometers.
The Americans and Gaddafi now became locked together in a cycle of mutual reinforcement. In the process, a powerful new image was created that was going to capture the imagination of the West. Gaddafi became a global superpower, ahead of what was called a rogue state. A madman who threatened the stability of the world, and Gaddafi was loving every minute of it.
Does he think in the past his decisions sometimes have been taken too quickly?
Maybe.
On world affairs?
Maybe.
I think sometimes that is what has made people in the world nervous of you, perhaps.
Then, there was another terrorist attack. There was an attack at a disco in West Berlin. The bomb killed an American soldier and injured hundreds. The Americans released what they said were intercepts by the National Security Agency that proved that Colonel Gaddafi was behind the bombing. And a dossier that they said proved that he was also the mastermind behind a whole range of other attacks. President Reagan ordered the Pentagon to prepare to bomb Libya, but again, there were doubts. This time, within the American government itself, there were concerns that analysts were being pressured to make a case that didn't really exist. And to do it, they were taking Gaddafi's rhetoric about himself as a global revolutionary and his manic ravings, and then representing them as fact. And in the process, together, the Americans and Gaddafi were constructing a fictional world.
Certainly, I'm convinced, pressured into developing a prima facie case against the Libyan government. From the somewhat incoherent ravings of a maniac, both interceptions of a clandestine nature and interceptions of a open radio broadcasts or whatever, as well as other sources, quotations of his, that one can assemble a neatly put together package demonstrating that the man had violent interests against the United States and its European allies.
The European intelligence agencies has told the Americans that they were wrong, that it was Syria that was behind the bombing, and not Libya. But the Americans decided to attack Libya because they couldn't face the dangerous consequences of attacking Syria. Instead, they went for Gaddafi, a man without friends or allies.
Libya had less downside consequences, if you will. There's less Arab support for Gaddafi. We figured there would be less Soviet support for Gaddafi. And there's no question but what Libya was more vulnerable than Syria and Iran. And that is certainly an element, of course.
In April 1986, the Americans attacked Libya. The targets included Colonel Gaddafi's own house. Immediately after the attack, Gaddafi appeared in the ruins to describe what had happened.
The family were asleep, and my wife was, that day, tied down to the bed because she had a slip disc. I tried to rescue the children, and the house started to collapse, as you can see, and the books started to burn. They concentrated on the children's room so that they would kill all the children. Our small adopted daughter was killed, and 2 of our children were injured.
But yet again, Gaddafi might have been lying. Ever since then, there have been rumors that his adopted daughter might have actually survived. But many other children were killed in the raid because the American bombing was so inaccurate. Gaddafi realized that the attention of the whole world was now focused on him, and he grabbed the mood to promote his own revolutionary theory, the Third Way, as a global alternative to democracy.
That I'm really responsible for conveying the Third World Theory and the Green Book to the rising generation, to the young American and British people, so that we can rescue America and Britain and these generations of young people from this theory this electoral party theory, which enabled an imbecile like Reagan to rule the mightiest power on earth and use it to destroy other people's homes and enable the harlot like Thatcher to rule a great nation like Britain.